A very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the second in a series of 4 talks that we'll be running throughout this week at Frieze Masters. My name is Jasper Sharp. I'm the curator for modern and contemporary art at the Kunsthistorisches Museum in Vienna. The format for these talks, the talk today, the talk tomorrow, and the talk on Friday, all follow a very similar pattern. And that is that the great historical museums of this world, the National Gallery, the Prado, the Louvre, the Kunsthistorische, they were all formed in the 19th century for a number of reasons, but one of the key reasons was to inspire and awe and educate the practicing artists of the time. When the Louvre opened, it was open to the public only 2 days a week. The rest of the week was exclusively reserved for artists. And artists were invited to listen into the conversations that had been going on between artists for hundreds of years and invited to participate in those conversations themselves for the first time. Cézanne famously referred to the Louvre as the book in which we learn to read. 100 years later, Lucian Freud, who had his own key to the National Gallery in London, spoke very movingly about his relationship with the National Gallery as like going to the doctor. He would go there for help. He'd be painting someone's ear and he'd get stuck. And he'd go to the National Gallery and look at Chardin, look at Delacroix, look at someone. Now, these problems, these museums also have a great problem, which is that their collections, in many of the cases, come to a grinding halt at a certain moment in history. In London, it's at 1900. The Louvre, it's in 1848. The museum where I work in Vienna, it's 1800. And with every year that we live, 2014, 2015, 2016, we move 1 year further away from these collections, the context in which they were collected, and the understanding, the sort of perception for which they were put together. And one way that museums are trying to overcome this problem is by engaging with the artists of today. And so what we've done this week is put together a series of discussions, bringing together 3 extraordinary artists with the directors and curators of 3 historical museums. I'll introduce these 2 illustrious gentlemen in 1 second. Tomorrow we have Philida Barlow, British artist, talking with Luke Sison, chairman of the Department of European Sculpture at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. And on Friday we have Edmund de Waal talking with Paulus Reiner, the curator of the Kunstkammer at the Kunsthistorisches Museum in Vienna. 2 of the conversations, the one today and the one tomorrow, are complete blind dates. Dr. Ernst Wegelin and William Kentridge did not know each other before. We invited William to be part of this conversation, and William himself chose the Courtauld. That is also the case tomorrow between Luke and Philida. They met in New York a number of weeks ago and walked through the museum. All of these conversation partners have met previously, walked through the respective museums, and the conversation today is hopefully an eloquent regurgitation of the experience that they had walking through the museum together. So I'm going to very briefly introduce these 2 gentlemen. William Kentridge, sitting closest to me, is a renowned artist who works in a variety of different media on different scales, from the vast and epic to the very small and intimate. He's represented by galleries all over the world. He's shown extensively all over the world. There's a current traveling show in Latin and Central America, a large traveling exhibition in Asia. For anyone here in London, there is a beautiful sculpture now erected in Golden Square at the moment, Firewalker, which you can go and see. And there is a Whitechapel art gallery project in the pipeline, which we'll be able to see here in the near future. And Dr. Ernst Wegelin is the head of the Courtauld Gallery. He is also an alumnus of the Courtauld Gallery, did his MA and his PhD with a specialization in 16th century religious painting. He has published and curated extensively on subjects ranging from 16th century portraiture to Fauvism to David Teniers the Younger, and most recently an exhibition dedicated to Pierre Renoir's La Loge painting. So over to you, gentlemen. There'll be a chance for everyone to ask questions at the end.
Yeah, well, Jasper, thank you very much. It was a real a real treat for me and the Courtauld to be involved in this project. We are not sort of bound by constraints of date at the Courtauld, so we are in principle able to collect modern and contemporary art. The way we go about that it has to be very carefully considered, but it is an area that we are committed to. We have started an exhibition program recently which has featured Richard Serra last year and a small Jasper Johns project this year. So we are trying to sort of define our sort of contribution to the museum landscape in this area. But it is very important to us, not so much, I should say, historically, as Jasper was saying, because of a sort of originating commitment to artists. In our case, as part of the Courtauld Institute, that originating commitment was to the students of the Courtauld Institute of Art. And their contemporary art is a major concern. And we feel that that ought to be reflected in the gallery as well. And interestingly, those students have included a number of contemporary artists, from Jeff Wall to Jeremy Deller most recently. So we have a particular sort of matrix at the Courtauld that we're exploring. And it was very thrilling in that context to be able to walk around the gallery with William Kentridge, and exciting in a sense for me personally, because it just reminded me of the vitality of these works that we care for, and their urgency in a sense, their ability still to communicate about contemporary issues. And it was also somewhat humbling in the sense that I came out of that sort of walk with William being suddenly very aware that the perspective that I brought to bear on these pictures and the stories I told about them, the narrative, was very came from a very sort of fixed point of view. And in each case, when I started to talk about the pictures, and I'm sure this will be apparent again, William came in with a very different set of questions and viewpoints. So we will, I'm sure, not be able to avoid those again this afternoon, and not want to. William, do you want to say anything before we start our virtual tour?
No, I think it's good to start with the images, because that's really where the conversation begins. But my choice for suggesting our meeting and talking about it had to do, I suppose, with the Courtauld as being one of the first painting galleries of older art that I saw I'm sure I was taken there as a child by my parents on my first trip to London when I was either 6 or when I was 11, or maybe both. And more than that, there were kind of key images in the collection which had also been sedimented in my childhood. So La Loge, which was spoken about, which we may well see a photo of. The Renoir painting of the woman with the opera glasses and the man in the box. My father had bought a print of that when he came to Oxford after the war. He bought a reproduction of that, and he had that, and in due course he gave that print to his parents, my grandparents, and that was in their apartment. So I grew up in a sense with a Renoir on the wall that I would see once a week. In the same way, in our house we had, in my bedroom there was a Miro, and we had a Matisse, a beautiful Matisse still life, and a Cézanne painting of a tree in the dining room. And it was only, I'm sure, when I was about 12 or 15 that I realized that they weren't the actual paintings. The paintings were in the museums. But they were good quality photographic prints, framed and displayed. And I think that early association of what are the images you are surrounded by is important. And I know as a 2-year-old or 3-year-old, what do you make of a Miro painting on a piece of Hessian with strange geometric shapes and almost humanoid forms? I think there's an interest in the riddle that a painting poses. There was a piece of one brush mark in the Cézanne of a view of a street, and all my childhood, and even now when I really looked at it, the question was this brush mark a drain in the wall at the side of the road, sort of seen at an angle, Or was it in fact a very simplified figure walking down the road? And I realized that the interest in the painting kept circling around the riddle that wouldn't solve itself, and the unexplained and the unexplainable. And in retrospect now, I sort of go back to those early riddles of being caught by something even though you couldn't describe it completely. And so I suppose as a fount of of some of these riddles and questions about what an image is, the Courtauld felt a very natural and good place. It's also a manageable space. It's not like the National Gallery. You don't have to think, well, which of the 15,000 things on the wall will we focus on? It was a great afternoon walking around seeing the collection.
Thank you. So we're going to start we're going to sort of mimic the tour as we organised it last week. And I thought it was important to actually start with a part of the collection that is hidden, but which our curator of drawings would always insist is perhaps more important than the collection that's on display, and that's a drawings collection, about 7,000 drawings. And I wanted particularly to ask William to look at a few sheets in that collection, because drawing is, as you will know, such a central part of his own practice. And we looked at Seurat drawings, at Cézanne drawings, and a number of other things, but I was particularly keen that we linger on, and we'll do that briefly here, on this late Michelangelo drawing, which I think is one of the most extraordinary drawings of its kind, produced in 1562, about 2 years before Michelangelo dies. He's 86 years old. He's an old man, frail. He is meditating on his own mortality, and in a sense sort of reaffirming his faith through the act of draftsmanship. You have in this drawing a very indistinct sort of representation of Christ, an absolutely sort of unheroic body on the cross. When you see it in the flesh, it has these extraordinary sort of trembling outlines where Michelangelo has repeatedly gone over the contours of Christ's body in this almost meditative sort of mystical way, as he's sort of struggling to materialize Christ on the page in front of him.
I mean, we do have a very different way of looking at the drawing. It is built up, firstly, it's done in black chalk, which is normally quite a blunt material. So I'm astonished, firstly, at the glue they must have used to hold the chalk together to get such a fine line. And the finest, I mean, the actual lines are very fine, because it's a very small drawing. So you look at it, the drawing's about that size. And for me, it's astonishing to think of Michelangelo, this person who's hewing these huge figures out of lumps of marble, who is painting the scale of the Sistine Chapel, this kind of engine of a man, having the extraordinary control to keep all of that strength in check, to make the lightness of those marks. It's astonishing to be able to make such a light charcoal mark, and then to slowly have the faith that just quietly working at it will accumulate into the form. And it also feels a completely contemporary drawing. If one sees just here in the fair, there are drawings of Giacometti in which a form is found by successively finding the edge of it with different possible edges with the marks. And it's not even as if the artist commits himself to a final edge. We sort of do, in looking at it, decide, well, okay, that's the line outside the body, and the body comes towards us at that point. And yes, I'm sure you're right that it does have to do with questions of mortality and vulnerability. But in the process of drawing it, I'm sure those are left aside. So maybe it's what comes out of the drawing rather than what Michelangelo knows he's putting in. And in all the drawings, the great drawings you have in the collection, I'm astonished at what is the part of the knowledge of the hand and the arm and the fingers, as opposed to an instruction being given by the brain. And it's about the conversation between what your hand makes and what your eye sees as it's made. And it's such a drawing, such a working drawing. It's such a drawing that makes itself in the process of the activity rather than an image known and then laid down on the sheet of paper.